Welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping straight into the hidden architecture of healthcare AI today. And I know you've probably heard a lot about AI in medicine lately.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere right now.
Right. But when we usually talk about it, the debate gets stuck on two very visible things, like what data goes into the machine, your symptoms, your medical history, and then what recommendation comes out.
Like a diagnosis.
Exactly, or a treatment plan. And we tend to judge the entire system based on, how accurate that final output appears to be.
Which makes sense on the surface.
It does. But the mission of our deep dive today is to look completely past those usual debates. We are pulling from an incredible paper called Inference Economies, the hidden architecture of healthcare AI.
Such a fascinating read.
It really is. And the goal here is to explore the invisible middle layer of artificial intelligence in healthcare. Because that middle layer is where the real power is shifting, and it's shifting far away from the traditional doctor-patient relationship.
Yeah, far away.
So, okay, let's unpack this. The core thesis we are looking at is that the most consequential, most impactful activity in healthcare AI does not happen at the input.
Right.
And it does not happen at the output. It happens entirely in between.
And that invisible space is where the fundamental philosophy of modern medicine is shifting under our feet. I mean, this goes way beyond a technical discussion about algorithms or data processing speeds.
Oh, absolutely.
We are talking about how you, as a patient, are quietly evaluated and categorized before a human doctor ever even enters the room.
Before they even see your chart.
Exactly. This middle layer alters the initial handshake between a patient and the healthcare system. It basically creates a reality where judgments about your future are made invisibly before any actual clinical conversation begins.
Let's ground this in a scenario that, well, you were probably experienced. Think about interacting with a triage bot on a hospital's website. Or answering a digital questionnaire right before an appointment.
We've all done it.
Right. You type in your symptoms, maybe your pain level, how long you've been feeling sick. And in that moment, it feels like you are just providing information. You're handing over the raw data of how you feel, like writing on a digital notepad.
But you're really not.
No, you're not. The reality of this architecture makes a profound distinction. You aren't just providing information. You are being interpreted.
Yeah.
The system is actively inferring likelihoods about you. And it's looking at four specific pillars of inference.
These are key.
Right. So first, it's calculating your risk of disease progression. Second, and this one is pretty controversial, it is determining your probability of non-compliance.
Yeah, that one always stops people in their tracks.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is what that actually means in practice. Probability of non-compliance is the algorithm guessing how likely you are to actually follow the doctor's orders.
Or if you'll even show up.
Exactly. Will you show up for your follow-up appointment? Will you actually take your medication? And we need to be clear, these inferences are not diagnoses.
Right. Determining a high probability of non-compliance is not a medical condition.
No, it's not. Nor are they explanations. The system doesn't tell a doctor why it thinks you won't take your medication. What they are actionable, probabilistic judgments.
They are statistical guesses about your future behavior.
Yes. And because they are actionable, the healthcare system begins making decisions based on them immediately.
And it doesn't stop at compliance either, because the third pillar is estimating your expected cost of care down the line. And the fourth is evaluating your suitability for certain interventions.
Which is huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
If an algorithm infers you are a poor candidate for a complex surgery based on a web of, behavioral data, that shapes your care path instantly.
It operates entirely in the background.
Entirely. It shapes the care you are about to receive, or perhaps the care you won't receive, long before you are sitting on the exam table.
The power dynamic completely flips here, because we usually think of power in a clinical setting as being direct and transparent.
Like a doctor physically examining you and saying no to a certain procedure.
Right. Or an insurance company sending a formal letter denying a claim. In those situations, you know exactly who made the decision and what the decision was.
You can point to it.
Exactly. But in this new inferential architecture, power does not require sharing to be effective. Exclusion doesn't happen through outright denial. It happens through quiet reclassification.
Quiet reclassification. I love that term from the paper. Let's look at the real-world impact of that, because we've all been stuck in that frustrating loop of trying to schedule a specialist, wondering why the earliest available slot is in, 2029?
Right, and we always just blame it on a busy office.
We do. But quiet reclassification means you might have been routed to a lower priority queue based on an invisible inference. Or you face a strangely delayed follow-up care schedule.
Or you don't even see the options.
Exactly. That's the most concerning part. It might mean certain treatment options are simply never presented to you at all. The AI inferred your suitability, decided against it, and the option literally evaporated from the doctor's screen.
It just vanishes.
From your point of view, nothing went wrong. You didn't get a rejection letter. You just experienced a slightly different, slightly less urgent version of the healthcare system.
And from the system's perspective, everything worked exactly as designed. It optimized the workflow based on its invisible inferences. Now, the defense of this is usually what we call the illusion of neutral intelligence.
Oh, right, the idea that math can't be biased.
Exactly. People point to the machine and say, well, it's just a computer, it's just math, it's neutral.
Which is a trap.
It's a huge trap. AI systems obviously don't have consciousness or malicious intent. They are simply optimizing according to their objective functions.
And when we say objective function, we just mean the specific goal the AI was programmed to maximize.
Right. Exactly. If a hospital administrator programs an AI to minimize ER wait times or maximize the turnover of hospital beds, the AI will relentlessly sort and categorize people to achieve that exact math.
It doesn't care about the human element.
No, but neutrality is absolutely not the same thing as accountability.
Just because a system uses statistics doesn't make it fair. There is a massive ethical gap here. The text points out this triple threat. An inference generated by a healthcare AI can be perfectly statistically defensible. The math might be entirely sound based on the historical data it trained on.
Right.
It can also be operationally efficient, genuinely saving the hospital time and money by sorting patients a certain way. But it can simultaneously be ethically destabilizing.
It is ethically destabilizing precisely because it happens below the threshold of explanation. In a traditional medical setting, if a doctor makes a decision that affects your body or your livelihood, procedural safeguards kick in.
You can ask why.
You can ask why. You can get a second opinion. You can formally contest the decision. An invisible inference bypasses all of those traditional procedural safeguards.
Because you don't even know it happened.
Exactly. The individual being inferred about has no way to interrogate, contest, or even see the judgment that just profoundly shaped their medical care. The opacity isn't a bug in the system. It is the friction that prevents accountability.
So here's where it gets really interesting, though. We have been looking at this strictly from a clinical patient-doctor perspective. But there is a massive economic shift happening beneath the surface here.
Oh, a massive shift.
Inference isn't just clinically valuable. It is an economic goldmine. The ability to predict human behavior and future health outcomes is incredibly lucrative. And these inferred insights are already shaping massive structural economic decisions far beyond the walls of any single hospital.
We are talking about the commodification of inference.
Yes.
The scale of the issue expands dramatically when we move into the structural assets shaped by these inferences. Take insurance pricing, for example.
Right.
If an AI can probabilistically infer your future cost of care based on behavioral breadcrumbs that directly impacts how risk is calculated for entire populations, then you have eligibility decisions. Access to specialized programs or coverage tiers can be quietly gated based on inferred compliance metrics.
And think about resource allocation on a macro scale. Where do hospital networks decide to build new facilities? Where do they deploy their specialists?
It dictates the physical infrastructure.
It does. If an AI infers that a specific zip code has a low probability of treatment adherence, a hospital network might use that invisible data to justify not building a new cardiac wing in that neighborhood.
Which is terrifying.
It bleeds directly into workforce planning. The invisible inferences extracted from your individual interactions are driving multi-million-dollar institutional decisions.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, treating inference as an asset to be exploited rather than a responsibility to be managed changes the entire DNA of the medical system.
Changes the whole goal.
Completely. Once inferences are treated as commodities, once they are traded to optimize institutional efficiency, the system shifts its fundamental goal. It begins optimizing for extractable value rather than human care.
And that's uniquely dangerous in healthcare.
It is, because the environment is defined by extreme vulnerability and an immense asymmetry of information. When you are sick, you don't have the luxury of shopping around. You are constrained.
You just need help.
Exactly. Monetizing inference in that specific environment quietly converts a care relationship into a surveillance relationship.
Wow.
You are no longer just a patient to be healed. You are a data source to be monitored and inferred upon for institutional gain.
Converting a care relationship into a surveillance relationship is a staggering concept. So what does this all mean? We have this invisible middle layer. It's making probabilistic judgments. It's quietly reclassifying people. And it is turned into this massive economic commodity.
Right.
How do we fix a system that is fundamentally designed to operate invisibly? The text makes it clear the answer isn't to smash the machines.
No, the AI is useful.
It has real clinical value when used correctly. The goal is to design concrete governance mechanisms to contain it. We have to keep the inference in its lane. And one of the strongest mechanisms for containing this threat is the concept of an inference escrow.
I love this concept.
It's so smart. Think of it like a financial escrow when you buy a house. The money, or in this case the data, is held conditionally by a neutral party, generated for a specific purpose, and crucially, it expires.
Right. In an inference escrow, these judgments about you are treated as conditionally accessible, not freely reusable.
They aren't just dumped into a database.
No, they aren't tossed into your permanent digital medical record to be endlessly repurposed across different hospital networks for the rest of your life. The value of the escrow concept is that it introduces deliberate friction.
Which tech usually hates.
Exactly. In the broader tech world, friction is usually treated as a flaw. Apps are supposed to be seamless and instantaneous. But in healthcare, frictionless data sharing is exactly what leads to that surveillance state we just talked about. Deliberate friction forces the system to pause. It preserves responsibility.
So if a hospital wants to use an inference about your likelihood of non-compliance, they have to access the escrow, prove they have the clinical authority for that specific interaction, and then the inference expires.
It's a single-use ticket.
It prevents these invisible judgments from following you around like a shadow file. Now, the second architectural solution the paper offers is federated learning. That sounds highly technical, but the core concept is actually straightforward.
It is.
Usually, to train a massive AI, you have to gather a mountain of raw personal health information and dump it into one giant centralized database. Federated learning flips that model. It allows the AI models to improve without ever centralizing the raw patient data.
The algorithm essentially travels to the local data source, like your community hospital's secure server. It learns the statistical pattern about disease progression, updates its broader model, and then leaves. But it leaves your personal data and the specific inferences made about you behind.
It doesn't take your identity with it.
Exactly. The core rule of this architecture is simple. The system learns. The inference does not travel.
The inference does not travel. I like that. Both the inference escrow and federated learning serve the same fundamental goal. They ensure that inference remains situated, meaning tied directly to a specific context of care and not portable, where it can be sold or repurposed.
Those governance models offer a path forward, absolutely. But we have to look at the reality of hospitals today.
Because it's not happening yet.
Not at all. These systems are largely ungoverned right now. Inference is running free, and that introduces a dangerous dynamic called cognitive distance.
Right.
This is the growing gap between what the AI system is doing in that invisible middle layer and what humans, even the most highly trained medical experts, can actually understand or intervene in. As the algorithms get more complex, the cognitive distance widens.
And the human cost of this distance falls really heavily on the doctors themselves.
Clinicians are experiencing a tragic downgrade here. The traditional role of a doctor is to synthesize information, apply years of experience, and make nuanced decisions.
Practice medicine.
To practice medicine. But when a doctor is handed an AI output like a red flag for high risk or a low priority triage score, without any insight into the inferential path that created it, their role fundamentally changes.
They can't see the work.
Because of that cognitive distance, they cannot verify the AI's logic. They are downgraded from being ultimate decision makers to becoming mere reviewers.
Wow.
They find themselves essentially rubber stamping the machine's invisible math because they simply don't have the tools to look under the hood.
And when that dynamic scales across an entire hospital network, accountability just dissolves into process. Nobody is truly responsible for the decision anymore. They are all just following the workflow generated by the inference engine.
Yeah.
And there's this profound line from the text here. The system still functions, but wisdom leaks out.
Wisdom leaks out.
The queues move, the beds are filled, the bills are processed, but the human intuition, the contextual understanding of a patient's unique life situation, the nuance of care, It all slowly drains out of the process.
And the most insidious part of this leaking wisdom is that the failures of ungoverned inference do not announce themselves.
Right, they're silent.
We expect technology to fail in spectacular, obvious ways. A massive data breach, a system crash, a huge public scandal. But inference failures are quiet. A slight misclassification here, a subtle deprioritization there. These errors compound silently over time through statistical feedback loops.
Let's actually break down how a statistical feedback loop works in this context, because it's tricky. If the AI invisibly flags a patient as high risk for noncompliance, it might deprioritize them for follow-up care.
Right.
Because they don't get the follow-up care, their health obviously deteriorates. The AI observes that deterioration and essentially says, see, I was right to flag them as a high risk.
It creates its own reality.
The system uses its own invisible judgments to justify future invisible judgments. It becomes a completely self-fulfilling prophecy.
And vulnerable populations intuitively sense when a system is working against them, even if they can't see the algorithm or the feedback loop.
They feel it.
They absolutely feel it. They recognize the friction in their care, and their reaction is the ultimate breakdown of the medical relationship. They adapt by disclosing less to their doctors, not more.
They hide information.
Yes, they withhold crucial health information to protect themselves from being quietly reclassified or judged. When patients feel surveilled rather than cared for, the entire foundation of medical trust collapses.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from our deep dive today. Artificial intelligence itself is not inherently dangerous. AI doesn't fail because it sees too much data. It fails when it is allowed to see without obligation. Ungoverned inference, that invisible middle layer operating without friction, without escrows, and without accountability, is the true danger here. Ultimately, what the AI infers about us, those probabilistic judgments it makes in the dark, matter significantly more than the raw facts we explicitly type into the intake forms.
And this raises a critical question about timing. The governance mechanisms we discussed must be implemented now.
Right now.
We have to govern inference before it becomes entirely invisible and just fully embedded in every single layer of global healthcare infrastructure. We cannot wait for massive scandals because the scandals will just look like standard operating procedure and operational efficiency.
It'll just look like business as usual.
Exactly. This governance has to happen before exclusion hardens and before the fundamental trust between patients and the medical system is irrevocably broken. Once the inferential infrastructure is fully poured and set like concrete, it will be almost impossible to dig it back out.
It fundamentally reframes how we need to view our digital health footprint. We hope this deep dive gave you a new lens to look through the next time you interact with a digital health platform. And we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Yeah, this is a big one.
It pushes everything we've talked about just one step further. If the most consequential medical record of your entire life is no longer your traditional chart of past illnesses, but rather the AI's invisible shadow file of your inferred future probabilities.
Your inferred self.
Exactly, your inferred self. What would happen if we demanded the right to legally see, audit, or even delete our inferred selves before we ever agreed to walk through the doors of a hospital?
That would change everything.
Just imagine how demanding that visibility would change the balance of power overnight. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible systems around you, and we will see you next time.